The container gardening market wants you to believe that serious food production requires serious ground space. Nurseries push raised bed kits. Landscaping companies sell installation packages, and gardening magazines feature half-acre plots that most people will never have. But experienced urban gardeners growing on balconies, patios, and rooftops quietly produce more food per square foot than many in-ground gardens. Here are 20 vegetables that deliver the highest yields in containers, and exactly how to grow them. Number 20, radishes. Radishes are the most underestimated container crop in existence. Most gardeners who grow them do so almost accidentally, tucking a few seeds into spare space, and then discover that a single container produces a continuous harvest from seed to table in as little as 22 days. No other edible plant comes close to that turnover speed. In a container as shallow as 15 centimeters, radishes grow, mature, and free up space for the next succession before most other vegetables have even established their root systems. A standard window box can produce 3 to 4 successive harvests across a single growing season, each one taking less than a month from seeding to pulling. The key is succession planting. Sow a short row every 10 days rather than an entire container at once, and you maintain a continuous supply without gluts. Radishes also signal soil quality immediately. Stunted or misshapen roots indicate compaction or inconsistent watering, making them a useful diagnostic tool for your container growing setup before you invest in slower crops. Radishes finish fast and free up space instantly, but the next vegetable on this list takes a completely different approach, producing continuously from a single planting for months on end without ever needing to be replaced. Number 19, spinach. Spinach produces more edible leaf per container area than almost any other green, and it does it in conditions that most vegetables refuse. It prefers cooler temperatures, which makes it the ideal crop for the shoulder seasons of early spring and autumn, when other containers sit empty and unproductive. A container 40 centimeters wide and at least 20 centimeters deep, planted with spinach at 5 centimeter spacing, produces a cut and come again crop that yields fresh leaves within 30 days of germination and continues producing for 8 to 10 weeks before bolting. Harvest the outer leaves and the center continues pushing new growth, dramatically extending the productive window of a single planting. In regions with mild winters, spinach in containers can be moved undercover to extend production into the coldest months. The portability of container growing, the ability to chase the best light and protect from frost, is an advantage that in-ground growing simply cannot replicate. Spinach thrives in the cold gaps that leave other containers standing empty. Now here's where it gets interesting. The next vegetable on this list thrives in full heat and still outproduces almost everything else you can grow in a pot. Number 18, cherry tomatoes. Full-size tomato varieties in containers are a compromise. They produce, but they struggle against the root restriction, the heat buildup in container walls, and the inconsistent watering that container environments create. Cherry tomato varieties, particularly those bred specifically for compact growing, are a different situation entirely. Varieties like Tumbling Tom, Sweet Million, and Tiny Tim are bred for exactly the conditions containers provide. They produce prolifically in containers of 40 liters or more, fruiting continuously rather than in a single flush, and delivering harvests that regularly run to several kilograms across a season from a single plant. The critical factors are container volume, consistent watering, and regular feeding. Cherry tomatoes in containers exhaust the nutrient supply of potting mix within 6 to 8 weeks of active growth. From that point, weekly liquid feeding maintains production. Skip feeding for 2 weeks in peak season and yield drops noticeably. Stay consistent and a single container plant produces more fruit than most people expect from a pot. Cherry tomatoes reward consistency, and so does the next plant, but through a completely different growing strategy that most container gardeners have never tried. Number 17. Kale. Kale is one of the most productive plants per container for anyone measuring output in terms of total edible biomass over a full season. A single established kale plant in a 30-liter container produces harvestable leaves within 6 weeks of transplanting and continues producing for 8 to 12 months in mild climates through summer heat, autumn cooling, and light winter conditions without replacement. The cut and come again harvest method maximizes this productivity. Remove the lower outer leaves as they reach full size, leaving the central growing tip intact, and the plant redirects energy into producing replacement leaves rather than flowering and seeding. Done consistently, this extends a single planting across multiple seasons in mild condition. Kale also improves nutritionally after frost exposure. Cold temperatures convert stored starches to sugars in the leaves, reducing bitterness and improving flavor. A container kale plant that has come through its first frost tastes measurably better than one harvested before cold weather arrives. Kale produces for seasons. The next vegetable on this list produces differently, giving you a harvest within days of germination if you know the method almost no one talks about. Number 16, peas. Most gardeners dismiss peas as a field crop, requiring long rows and dedicated space. What they miss is that peas grown in deep containers against a sunny wall, fence, or trellis produce heavy yields in a remarkably small footprint. A container 60 centimeters wide and 40 centimeters deep, planted with a double row of peas and supported by a simple bamboo frame, produces harvests that begin within 60 days of sowing and continue for 4 to 6 weeks. Dwarf varieties like Tom Thumb and Half Pint are specifically suited to container production, reaching 60 to 70 centimeters in height and producing full-sized pods without the sprawling growth of standard variety. They require no elaborate support structure and fit comfortably on balconies and small patios where taller varieties would become unmanageable. The additional benefit of growing peas in containers is the nitrogen they fix into the potting medium during their growing cycle. When the plants are finished, cutting them at the base and leaving the roots to decompose in the container improves the soil for the next crop without any additional amendment. Peas fix nitrogen and feed the next crop. But what comes next on this list feeds you continuously from one of the smallest containers on this entire list, which is exactly why it surprises so many gardeners when they see how much it actually produces. Number 15, spring onions. Spring onions produce a harvest from a container as small as 15 centimeters deep, require almost no maintenance between sowing and pulling, and can be succession planted every 2 weeks to maintain a continuous supply from late spring through early winter. A single window box cycling through successive sowings produces more spring onions across a season than most households can consume. The productivity comes from density. Spring onions can be sown at 2 centimeter spacings in container growing, far denser than most seed packet recommendations, because they are harvested young before they compete significantly with each other. Sow thickly, thin lightly, and pull progressively as individual plants reach usable size. Spring onions also regrow from the base after cutting. Leave 1 centimeter of the white base in the container after pulling the top. Keep the container watered, and a second, smaller shoot emerges within 10 to 14 days. It is smaller than the original, but perfectly usable, effectively giving you a partial second harvest from the same planting before the space is needed for succession. Spring onions keep giving after harvest. The next vegetable on this list keeps growing in a way that confounds gardeners who have never tried it in a container before. Number 14, Swiss chard. Swiss chard behaves in containers the way kale does, but it tolerates heat better, recovers faster after heavy harvesting, and produces leaves of a larger individual size that make harvesting faster and more efficient per picking. A single plant in a 25-liter container can produce continuous harvests across a full growing season from late spring through to hard frost. The stems are edible alongside the leaves, which increases the total edible yield per plant significantly compared to leafy crops where only the blade is used. Both the leaf and the stem cook differently, which extends the culinary usefulness of a single harvest into multiple distinct preparations. Swiss chard also tolerates partial shade better than most fruiting crops, which makes it one of the few high-yield container vegetables that performs well on north-facing balconies and in the shadow of walls or larger structures where full sun crops like tomatoes would struggle to produce anything worthwhile. Swiss chard handles shade and heat equally well. Here is what most gardeners get completely wrong about the next crop. They think it needs too much space, and it turns out the opposite is true in containers. Number 13, cucumbers. Standard cucumber varieties in containers produce poorly because their root systems exceed what most containers provide, and their vining habit creates management problems on a small patio. Bush varieties developed specifically for container growing tell an entirely different story. Bush Pickle and Space Master are compact varieties that produce full-sized cucumbers from plants reaching only 60 to 90 centimeters, fitting comfortably in 40-liter containers with a simple vertical support. They produce prolifically in warm conditions, often delivering 2 to 3 cucumbers per plant every 5 to 7 days during peak season, with total seasonal yields that regularly reach 4 to 6 kilograms per container. The critical production factor is consistent watering. Cucumbers are more than 90% water by composition, and any period of water stress during fruit development produces bitter, misshapen cucumbers and triggers early end of production. In containers, which dry out faster than in-ground beds, this means checking moisture levels daily in warm weather rather than relying on rainfall or a fixed watering schedule. Cucumbers reward attentive watering. The next crop on this list rewards patience. And once it starts producing, it barely stops for the rest of the season. Number 12, zucchini. A single zucchini plant in a 60-liter container is one of the most productive food plants it is possible to grow in a confined space. One plant produces fruit continuously from first flowering through to first frost, delivering harvests every 2 to 3 days during peak summer production that regularly exceed 1 to 2 fruit per plant per week across a season that can stretch to 4 months. The management requirement is harvest frequency. Zucchini fruit left on the plant grows rapidly, reaching inedible sizes within days, and signaling to the plant that seed production is complete, which slows or stops further fruiting. Harvesting fruit at 15 to 20 centimeters keeps the plant in continuous production mode and maintains the tender texture that makes zucchini culinarily versatile. Bush varieties like Patio Star and Bush Baby are bred for container growing specifically, producing the same yields as full-size varieties in a compact plant form that does not overwhelm smaller outdoor spaces. In a 60-liter container, with weekly feeding from 6 weeks after transplanting, one plant produces more zucchini across a season than most single households consume. Zucchini is relentless once it starts. So is the next plant on this list, but it produces something completely different, and it does it vertically, which is what makes it so valuable in small spaces. Number 11, climbing bean. Climbing bean, particularly runner beans and climbing French beans, are among the highest yield container crops available when vertical space is used alongside container volume. A container 40 centimeters wide and 40 centimeters deep, planted with 4 to 6 climbing bean plants and supported by a 2-meter cane structure, produces harvests over a 10 to 12 week period that regularly total 3 to 5 kilograms of pods per container. The key advantage over bush varieties is the extended production period. Climbing beans produce continuously over a much longer season than bush types, which tend to produce heavily for 2 to 3 weeks and then decline. Regular harvesting of pods before they become stringy and begin to develop seed keeps climbing varieties in production mode for the full season. Climbing beans also work as a privacy screen on balconies and patios, providing dense green coverage on a vertical surface that serves both an aesthetic and productive function. The same structure that supports the plants creates a living wall that blocks sightlines from neighboring buildings while producing a significant volume of food. Climbing beans go up and produce heavily. The next vegetable in this list does something at the surface level that most people never expect from a container environment. Number 10, lettuce. Lettuce is the container crop with the highest yield to space ratio when grown using the cut and come again method, rather than the whole head harvest approach most gardeners default to. A container 50 centimeters wide and 15 centimeters deep, planted with a mixed loose leaf variety, and harvested by cutting the outer leaves to within 5 centimeters of the base every 10 to 14 days, produces continuous fresh salad from one planting for 8 to 10 weeks before the crop bolts. Heat management extends this window significantly. Lettuce bolts in response to heat and lengthening days. Positioning the container where it receives morning sun and afternoon shade, or moving it to a cooler location during midsummer heat, delays bolting by 2 to 4 weeks without any change to watering or feeding regimes. Container portability makes this heat management strategy simple in ways that in-ground growing cannot match. Loose leaf varieties like oak leaf, lalo rosso, and various butterhead types are more bolt resistant than iceberg-style heading varieties and better suited to cut and come again production. They also mature faster, with first harvest possible within 28 to 35 days of sowing. Lettuce produces fast and continuously with the right technique. The next vegetable on this list produces something more substantial from a container that doubles as one of the most efficient uses of vertical space in urban gardening. Number 9. Peppers. Peppers are slow starters, requiring warmth and patience for the first 8 to 10 weeks after transplanting. What they deliver after that establishment phase is a production period that continues until first frost, in some climates stretching across 5 to 6 months, from a single plant in a container as small as 20 liters. Both sweet and hot pepper varieties produce well in containers, but the productivity calculation differs. A single sweet pepper plant delivers fewer individual fruits, but at higher weight per fruit. A single hot pepper plant may produce dozens of small fruits across a season. And because hot peppers are used in smaller quantities per meal, a single plant often produces more than one household can use. The critical management factor is warmth. Peppers are tropical plants that stop producing when nighttime temperatures drop below 15 degrees Celsius. In container growing, this creates the option to extend the season by moving plants indoors or undercover when temperatures drop, then moving them back out when conditions warm again. A well-managed container pepper plant moved indoors during cold snaps regularly produces for 2 to 3 weeks longer than in-ground plants left exposed to the same temperatures. Peppers run long when managed correctly. What comes next on this list runs even longer, and it does it from a container that most gardeners would never think is big enough for what it produces. Number 8. Dwarf French beans. Bush French beans in containers are one of the most efficient protein-producing crops per container area available to urban gardeners. A container 50 centimeters wide and 30 centimeters deep, filled with 4 to 6 bush French bean plants, produces a concentrated harvest over 3 to 4 weeks that yields 2 to 3 kilograms of pods per container with minimal maintenance between sowing and harvest. The efficiency comes from the plant's growth habit. Bush French beans are self-supporting, require no staking or training, grow to a compact 40 to 50 centimeters in height, and direct the majority of their energy into pod production rather than vegetative growth. They are also fast, delivering first harvest within 50 to 60 days of direct sowing in warm conditions. For maximum container productivity, plant successive containers 2 weeks apart. The first container produces its concentrated harvest, while the second is still establishing. And by the time the second peaks, a third container is ready to begin. 3 containers cycling in succession provide near-continuous bean production across the entire warm growing season. Bush beans give you a reliable protein crop in small spaces. The next vegetable on this list gives you something else entirely, a crop that most people pay a premium for at farmers markets and grow from a container the size of a bucket. Number 7. Beetroot in containers produces both a root crop and an edible leaf crop simultaneously, which makes it one of the highest total yield vegetables per container area when both components are harvested intelligently. The young leaves are nutritionally dense and culinarily similar to Swiss chard. Harvesting them progressively while the root develops below extends the productive use of the container without reducing final root yield. Round varieties like Boltardy and Detroit perform best in containers, requiring only 20 centimeters of depth and tolerating slightly closer spacings than the 10 centimeter recommendation for in-ground growing. A container 50 centimeters wide and 25 centimeters deep produces 8 to 12 usable roots per planting, with leaves available for harvest from 4 weeks after germination, and roots ready from 10 to 12 weeks. Beetroot also stores exceptionally well after harvest. Unlike lettuce or cucumbers, which must be consumed within days, harvested beetroot stores in cool conditions for 4 to 8 weeks. A container harvest does not need to be consumed immediately, which makes it a practical crop for gardeners who cannot always match harvest timing to consumption. Beetroot gives you 2 crops from 1 container. The next crop on this list gives you 1 crop that many gardeners consider the most valuable of any vegetable by weight, grown from a container that costs almost nothing to set up. Number 6. Potatoes. Container potatoes are one of the great underused food production strategies in urban gardening. A 30 to 40 liter fabric grow bag or plastic container filled progressively with compost, as the stems grow upward, produces 4 to 6 kilograms of potatoes from a footprint smaller than half a square meter. The harvest is cleaner than digging in-ground beds, The container can be placed anywhere that receives 6 hours of sunlight, and the growing medium is ready to be reused for a different crop at the end of the season. The earthing up technique that makes container potatoes productive is simple. Start with 15 centimeters of compost in the bottom of the container and plant 2 to 3 seed potatoes on the surface. As stems emerge and reach 20 centimeters, cover all but the top 5 centimeters with additional compost. Repeat this process until the container is full. Each buried stem section develops additional tubers, multiplying the final harvest significantly compared to simply planting and waiting. Early varieties like Rocket and Swift mature in 60 to 70 days, making them practical for even short growing seasons. A container started in early spring and harvested in early summer frees the growing space for a warm season crop in the same location, doubling the annual productivity of that single container. Potatoes perform remarkably in bags and containers. Here's the thing about the next crop that almost no one realizes until they grow it in a pot themselves. Number 5. Eggplant. Eggplant, or aubergine, is rarely listed among the best container vegetables because most gardeners assume it needs the same warm, expansive conditions as full-size tomatoes. Compact varieties developed for container growing, particularly patio baby and Ophelia, produce full-sized fruit from plants that reach only 50 to 60 centimeters in height and thrive in 30-liter containers in full sun. A single well-managed container eggplant produces 4 to 8 full-sized fruits across a season in warm conditions. The key phrase is well managed. Eggplants are heavy feeders that require weekly liquid feeding from 6 weeks after transplanting, consistent moisture to prevent bitter fruit development, and full sun without compromise. In these conditions, container eggplants produce reliably and continuously until temperatures drop in autumn. The container advantage for eggplants specifically is heat management. These plants are tropical in origin and perform better when their root zone is warm. Dark-colored containers absorb heat and raise root zone temperatures above ambient, mimicking the warm soil conditions that eggplants naturally prefer and extending productive growth into cooler autumn weeks. Eggplants love warmth and reward consistent feeding. The next vegetable on this list loves exactly the same conditions, but produces in a way that surprises even experienced container gardeners when they see the seasonal totals. Number 4. Tomatoes. Indeterminate varieties in large containers. Standard indeterminate tomato varieties grown in containers of 60 liters or more produce yields that match or exceed in-ground plants in shorter seasons when managed correctly. The container environment, which controls root zone moisture and temperature precisely, actually advantages indeterminate tomatoes over in-ground growing in heavy clay or poorly draining soil, which describes most urban garden ground. Varieties like Sun Gold, Black Cherry, and Gardener's Delight perform exceptionally in large containers with consistent care. A single plant in a 60-liter container, trained to a single cordon and supported vertically, produces 4 to 6 trusses of fruit in a standard season, with each truss delivering 15 to 30 cherry fruits, or 4 to 8 larger fruits depending on the variety. The management requirements are non-negotiable. Consistent watering prevents blossom, end rot, and fruit splitting, two of the most common container tomato problems, both caused by inconsistent moisture supply rather than disease or nutrient deficiency. Weekly feeding with a high potassium liquid fertilizer from first flowering maintains production through the full season without soil nutrient depletion becoming a limiting factor. Tomatoes in large containers produce as well as in-ground plants, but the number 3 crop on this list does something different. It produces from a container you can move, stack, or hang, which changes the entire calculation for small spaces. Number 3. Strawberries. Strawberries in containers produce fruit from a planting that requires almost no vertical space, can be positioned on walls, railings, balcony edges, and stacked tiered planters, and delivers harvests from late spring through early autumn, when everbearer varieties are selected rather than the once fruiting June-bearing types. Everbearer varieties like Albion, Seascape, and Everest produce multiple flushes of fruit across the growing season, rather than a single concentrated harvest, making them far more practical for households that want continuous fresh fruit rather than a glut for jam making. A single container of 6 everbearer plants produces fruit from May through September in temperate climates, with the largest flushes in early summer and again in early autumn. The container advantage for strawberries is protection from soil-borne disease. Verticillium wilt and crown rot devastate in-ground strawberry beds over successive seasons. In containers with fresh potting medium, these diseases are absent, and plants perform at full productivity for 2 to 3 seasons before requiring replacement. Strawberries produce continuously across multiple seasons with almost no ground space. Here is what makes the next vegetable remarkable. It takes everything that works about container growing and multiplies it across something you harvest daily rather than weekly. Number 2, herbs as a system, not individual plants. The most productive container setup in any kitchen garden is not a single high-yield vegetable, but a herb container system that produces something harvestable every day of the growing season, and in some cases year-round. The reason herbs rank this high on a productivity list is total seasonal yield measured against container space, ongoing value at the point of use, and the fact that the equivalent fresh herbs at retail cost significantly more across a season than any single vegetable crop. A 50-centimeter container divided between basil, parsley, chives, and coriander, managed as a cut-and-come-again system with succession sowings of the faster bolting varieties, produces fresh herbs daily from spring through late autumn. Each herb serves a different culinary function, meaning the container delivers practical harvest value every day, rather than concentrated delivery during a brief fruiting window. The economic productivity of a well-managed herb container exceeds that of almost any other container crop when measured in retail value of equivalent fresh product purchased weekly. A container system maintained for 20 weeks of productive growth, delivering fresh herbs 4 to 5 times per week, replaces what would cost $30 to $50 of fresh herb purchases at retail prices. Herbs make the container system financially productive every day, and the number 1 vegetable on this list makes the container system physically productive at a scale no one expects until they grow it for themselves. Number 1, garlic. Garlic is the most overlooked container crop and the most productive when productivity is measured correctly. A single 40-centimeter container planted with 12 to 15 individual cloves in autumn produces 12 to 15 full bulbs of garlic by early summer of the following year, requiring almost zero maintenance between planting and harvest, zero pest management, and zero feeding if planted into good quality potting compost at the start. Garlic occupies container space during the months when most containers sit empty. Planted in October and November, it grows slowly through winter, accelerates in spring, and is ready to harvest in June and July, freeing the container for a warm season crop in the exact window when warm season crops want to go in. A single container of garlic fits perfectly into the container gardening calendar without displacing any other productive planting. The variety selection matters significantly. Hardneck varieties produce larger, more complex flavored cloves and also deliver garlic scapes in early summer, which are the curling green flower stems that are themselves an edible harvest, effectively giving 2 crops from 1 container in 1 season. Softneck varieties produce more cloves per bulb and store longer after harvest, extending the productive value of 1 planting across months of kitchen use. Garlic also repels many of the pests that damage neighboring containers when planted nearby. Its sulfur compounds deter aphids, fungus gnats, and spider mites through proximity, making a container of garlic a functional companion to every other productive container in your growing space. There is no container crop that occupies off-season space, requires less active management, produces a dual harvest of scapes and bulbs, stores longer after harvest, protects neighboring crops, and delivers a product that costs significantly more to buy than to grow. That is why garlic sits at the top of this list. Before you go, which of these 20 vegetables are you starting with in your containers this season? Or do you already grow one of these and have a yield that surprised you? Share it in the comments below. If you are ready to turn your patio, balcony, or windowsill into a serious food production system, subscribe now. And if you think containers are where the garden industry's hidden knowledge ends, click the next video. What they have never told you about container soil is going to change how you set up every pot you own. We will see you there.